Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Conrad Gorlinski, and this is the news. Well, Ukraine and Russia have reached an agreement as part of the capitulation of the Azovstal steel plant. Almost 1,000 defenders of the conglomerate surrendered to the Russians, but their fate is now uncertain. The agreement allowed the Ukrainian forces to save the lives of their heroic defenders of Mariupol, and Russia to quickly announce victory in this city. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, 959 Ukrainian soldiers who were in the Azovstal plant in Mariupol have surrendered. However, for the time being, there is no way to verify this information. It's known that the prisoners of war were transported to the former penal colony in Olenivka, which is under Russian occupation. As for the operation to evacuate our heroes from Azovstal, it continues. It's supervised by our military and intelligence. International mediators are also involved. Ukraine is trying to liberate its people and territories. Therefore, the evacuation operation will continue. When it comes to the exchange of prisoners of war, including our boys, we will discuss it with some caution so as not to ruin the fragile negotiation process. The Russians continue their missile attacks at night and in the morning. Everyone is afraid, but you have to live. 8 people remained in this block, a dozen more in the neighboring blocks, about 30 in total. Everyone comes here. They cook, they receive humanitarian aid. When more powerful fires started, we took refuge in the shelter. We kindly ask journalists not to give the exact location, because that usually turns out very badly. It already happened. Just a few hours after an interview was given, the Russians started shelling us. They got the school, our block twice, and then the garages started to burn. Ukrainian sappers are clearing liberated areas of explosives. Since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has already lost over 28,000 soldiers, over 3,000 armored combat vehicles, 202 aircraft, and 102 cruise missiles. Finally, 78 years ago, Joseph Stalin ordered the deportation of the Crimean Tatars. On May 18, 1944, the Soviet authorities began the forced deportation of the indigenous people of Crimea, the Crimean Tatars, from their only homeland. After the terrible war, the entire nation was on the brink of extinction. Today, we're returning to those experiences again, in conditions when the descendants of this tyranny are not only trying to deprive the Crimean Tatars of their home for the second time from 2014, but they want to take the homes of all Ukrainians, all who live in our land. As part of the deportation, almost 200,000 people were deported to Central Asia within a few days. Sweden and Finland have officially applied for accession to NATO. Ankara, however, has announced that it will block these candidatures. Meanwhile, the European Commission announced that it wanted to allocate around 300 billion euro to building infrastructure that would reduce energy dependence on Russia. Finland and Sweden have officially submitted applications to join the North Atlantic Alliance. The ambassadors of both countries handed over the documents to the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the NATO headquarters in Brussels.
And I warmly welcome the requests by Finland and Sweden to join NATO. You are our closest partners, and your membership in NATO would increase our shared security. The applications you have made today are an historic step.
Sweden, along with Finland, have agreed to go hand in hand through the entire process. It's a clear signal that we are united on the way to the future. Sweden also counts on cooperation with Turkey as part of NATO. We expect it to be a new, important stage in our bilateral relations, as Sweden supports the fight against all kinds of terrorism and recognizes the list of terrorist organizations drawn up by the European Union and NATO. Turkey is to demand that Finland and Sweden recognize the Kurdish separatist organization Kurdistan Workers' Party as a terrorist organization. It also wants both of these countries to lift the arms export restrictions they have placed on Ankara. According to the Turkish government, the restrictions on weapons run counter to the spirit of the alliance. They want to come on Monday. I told them not to bother. There's no such need. Their attitude is clear. Terrorist organizations are still active in Sweden. Their marches continue. That is why I call on both of the decision makers that influence politics in the region and our allies in NATO. Support the legitimate, fair, and humane actions of Turkey, or at least do not try to prevent them. But not only Turkey is against a NATO enlargement. The president of Croatia, Zoran Milosevic, is also threatening a veto, citing the interests of the Croatian minority in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nevertheless, the Joe Biden administration is confident that an agreement can be reached.
There was, over the weekend, and there has been, a strong consensus for bringing Finland and Sweden into the alliance if they so choose. The Secretary made the point that we are confident that we will be able to preserve that consensus should Finland, should Sweden formally apply for NATO membership.
Volodymyr Zelensky was the guest of honor at the Cannes Film Festival, which began yesterday on the Côte d'Azur. The president of Ukraine inaugurated one of the greatest events in the world of film, referring in his speech to the brave role of the legend of cinema Charlie Chaplin, who made the film The Dictator, a satire about Adolf Hitler during World War II. We need a new Chaplin to prove that today's cinema is not silent. Hatred will disappear and dictators will die. We must win in the end. We need a cinema that will guarantee us the end of what is happening, that will always be on the side of freedom. And, as it has always been so far, cinema will rise above evil. Meanwhile, Brussels is conducting intensive negotiations on the sixth package of sanctions against Russia. As the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced today, the community wants to allocate funds to the development of energy infrastructure in order to reduce dependence on Russian raw materials.
Putin's war is, as we all see, heavily disrupting the global energy market. It shows on one hand how dependent we are on imported fossil fuels, but it also shows how vulnerable we are on relying on Russia for importing our fossil fuels, and therefore we must now reduce as soon as possible, our dependency on Russian fossil fuels.
The EU also pledged to allocate further funds to support the Ukrainian army. As the head of the EU diplomacy, Josep Borrell, said, Ukraine is at a turning point in the war, and that is why we must now mobilize efforts and support the besieged country in its fight against the Russian aggressor. The European Commission will provide 248 million euro to 5 member states, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, which have incurred the greatest costs in terms of accepting refugees since the beginning of this ongoing war. The decision follows the global event on April 9th, Stand Up for Ukraine, where the Commission pledged to allocate up to 400 million euro in support to refugees from Ukraine and the most affected member states. Member states can use these funds to provide immediate assistance such as food, transport, and temporary accommodation for those fleeing Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, while increasing their capacity to manage the EU's external borders. In order to ensure that funds are spent quickly and without heavy administrative burden, the Commission will increase these funds based on the results achieved, not the actual costs. The Commission will make the remaining 152 million euro available after approval by the Budget Service. And finally, anti-government protesters are not giving up in Sri Lanka. They gathered outside Colombo's historic Fort railway station today, this time demanding the arrest of former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Between 250 and 300 protesters chanted slogans and held placards denouncing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother and former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. More than a month of predominantly peaceful protests against the government's handling of the economy turned deadly last week when supporters of the former Prime Minister stormed an anti-government protest site in the commercial capital, Colombo. Days of subsequent clashes between protesters, government supporters, and police left 9 dead and more than 300 injured.
Now we are pressurized that IGP, they should have immediately arrest Mahinda Rajapaksa and who are the responsible for the attack.
Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned on May 9th, leaving Gotabaya, his younger brother, to rule on as president. Sri Lanka's economic crisis, unparalleled since its independence in 1948, has come from the confluence of the COVID-19 pandemic battering the tourism-reliant economy, rising oil prices, and populist tax cuts. Other factors have included heavily subsidized domestic prices of fuel and a decision to ban the import of chemical fertilizers, which devastated the agricultural sector. As usual, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Please stay with us for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and other programs. But from me, it's have a wonderful night.